Stalin, consigned to what his old enemy Trotsky called the dustbin of history. He's in good company. Brezhnev is in disgrace. Even Lenin is no longer the hero he was. Leaders who ruled 100 Soviet nationalities, gathering dust in the cellars of a Moscow museum. Will Mikhail Gorbachev end up here too? I don't know. I do know that a bloody and extraordinary history has touched every one of his millions of subjects.
Moisey Muravnik was one of 20 children from Belorussia. The Muravniks were Jews. They took the train east to escape persecution. The Trans-Siberian Railway had opened up the heart of the empire. It brought the Muravniks 3,000 miles to the gold fields along the river Lena. Siberian gold miners worked in temperatures which could fall to -60. Their lives were hard and dangerous. In 1912, they went on strike. They asked for more money, an 8-hour day, and an education for their children.
We all got together from the mines, collected in one place around the Nadezhensk mine, and off we marched. It was peaceful, really peaceful. Nobody suspected a thing. So when the shooting started, it took us completely by surprise. Well, you know, we had 500 workers killed or wounded that day. I can still picture it. The snow still hadn't melted and there were bodies lying around on the ground. Women and children crying over them. It was terrible. I can't forget it. It was the first time I'd ever seen anyone get shot. Never seen anything like that. It opened our eyes.
The strike went on. We asked for bread, you gave us bullets. Long live the right to strike. Shame on the butchers. As the Siberian families buried their dead, 500,000 workers went on sympathy strike in every corner of the empire. August 1914, Winter Palace Square, St. Petersburg. Patriotic fervor as the Tsar announced war with Germany. Hostility towards him vanished. The French ambassador said, to those thousands, the Tsar really was the autocrat, the absolute master of their bodies and souls. The first Russian men marched off with their heads held high, but the army had 1 million more men than rifles. The old soldiers at the Communist Party rest home were lucky to survive. In the first year alone, 4 million Russian soldiers were sacrificed.
We fought for the Tsar. Well, that's what it looked like. But really, we were fighting to get the Germans off our backs. Your country is your country, no matter whether there's a Tsar up there or whoever. So that's why we fought. We fought for our country.
At the front, conditions were very difficult. I ended up having to spend the autumn, winter, and then the spring there. We had a hard time of it in the Carpathian Mountains. Our clothes were really light. We only had summer boots to wear. There weren't any winter boots to be had. There weren't any trenches either to dig ourselves in, because the ground there was too rocky. We ended up sitting in the snow.
Rations were bad, and there was nothing of them. The soldiers just went hungry. The soldiers had to eat all together, 8 at a time, and all off one plate. In fact, soldiers had no rights at all. We weren't allowed into the parks or gardens. You weren't allowed to take your dog in. And soldiers couldn't walk around in there either. It was written up above the entrance, no soldiers, no dogs.
Men treated like dogs died like dogs. And discontent mounted with the casualty figures.
Some of the soldiers, the ones from a working class background, were already in the mood for revolution, without a doubt. We got discussions organized. I told them all about Siberia and all about that strike we had, why we went on strike, all that kind of thing.
1917 was the year the old Russian Empire took a step into the unknown, a year of revolution and experiment which transformed this country.
Down with the old regime, the banners said. Women workers and soldiers' wives led the first demonstrations. By the third day, 250,000 people were on strike in the capital. A small boy from a socialist family made his way to the city center.
It was full of people discussing and shouting, you want food, you want bread. The feeling was rather tense because in the corner of the square near the station there was a detachment of mounted gendarmes, a political police, and nobody knew what was going to happen, of course. And then suddenly we heard shouting that the Cossacks are coming. In such circumstances, there would be a feeling of panic, because Cossacks were even more feared than gendarmes. But to our surprise, on the contrary, the shouting seemed to be quite joyful, cheerful. In fact, they were cheering the Cossacks. That was something quite unexpected.
At the naval base of Kronstadt, Philip Musatov saw an officer lynched.
I didn't just watch it. I took part in the whole thing. I was there. At Kronstadt, there was this admiral. He was commander of the whole fleet. We got him unprepared in square. We bayoneted him. We killed him. Of course, it was hard. I think even when you're faced with killing your worst enemy, it's the same thing. You can feel it's wrong. It was the same then, but what can you do? At the time, the situation was such that we didn't even think about it. It was just, come on, finish him off, kill him.
Father Alexander Trofimov, now in exile in Paris, was then an officer cadet.
We
even went marching around with red flags and drums, rejoicing at it all, because the Bolsheviks were saying that now we are free and everything's going to be wonderful. And we all believed it too, during those first few days of the February Revolution.
Margot Tracy's family were wealthy capitalists who ran a brewing empire. They welcomed the revolution too.
Everybody was fed up with the Tsar because they thought he was weak. And when the Tsar actually abdicated, there was great rejoicement everywhere. And I remember my parents opened champagne bottles and celebrated it with friends. Everybody was very pleased because they never expected anything to get worse. They thought everything was going to be better because he was much criticized. There were lots of scandals at court. And so everybody thought things were for the better.
This is the way the Russians remember the October Revolution. This heroic reconstruction was a piece of street theatre filmed to celebrate a revolutionary anniversary. The truth was less dramatic. The rising began not at the Winter Palace, but at the city post office and telephone exchange. captured by a band of red sailors.
The post office and telegraph were being guarded by officer cadets, supporters of the provisional government. We disarmed them. Well, there were more of us than them. There must have been 800 of us and maybe 300 of them. So we disarmed them and kicked them out. And we cut off the telephone lines to the provisional government where they were meeting in the Winter Palace. Then I went off to the Winter Palace with a small unit, about 25 men. The Winter Palace was heavily defended. At all the windows everywhere, there were sandbags. And behind these barricades, there was a guard of Tsar's cadets, armed with rifles and machine guns. There was one point defended by the Women's Death Battalion, the most vulnerable spot, the only place that we could take. We thought if we went into the attack all shouting, "Hurrah!" they wouldn't shoot at us. Then we would somehow scramble past their defenses and get into the Winter Palace that way. It didn't work out. They fired a hail of bullets at us.
The storming of the Winter Palace. In reality, it was dark. It was foggy. There were no film cameras. There was hardly any resistance. 5 soldiers and 1 sailor died. In Moscow, Soviet power was not so easily won. There were 7 days of pitched battles as officers struggled to defend February against October.
We fought the Bolshevik government. Our attack began successfully enough. We formed up into lines and rushed the Kremlin and burst through. Some of our men were already dead and wounded by then. But still, we took the Kremlin and hung on to it for several days. Then we had to abandon it. The Reds began to overwhelm us. Big reinforcements came from Petersburg. These troops who came from Petersburg, they believed in the Bolsheviks. They were dedicated to the Bolsheviks. They had already taken the Winter Palace in Petersburg. And then they threw everything they had into Moscow to crush our rebellion.
By the time the fighting was over, 500 men and women lay dead. The Kremlin had passed into the control of the Red Guards, including Leonid Orlovsky.
The battle lasted 7 days and 7 nights. But our enthusiasm was so great. More and more people kept coming across to join us. Well, people were killed. People were wounded. Of course I was afraid for my life. I tried not to get in the way of the bullets, tried to stay alive. We knew we were going to our deaths because we were making a revolution.
The Don Cossacks were among the first to mount an organized military resistance to Soviet power.
We were shocked. We couldn't understand how Russia could live if there was no Tsar. We found material in a military store and leather to make boots, and we all became shoemakers. We were very well dressed. That was our newly formed Russian fighting force. The counter-revolution had begun.
Leon Trotsky got the job of countering the counter-revolution. As Commissar for War, Trotsky began to recruit a new kind of army. It was called the Workers' and Peasants' Red Army.
When we created the Red Army, we didn't have any commanders of our own. There were non-commissioned officers, those in charge of small units. But proper trained officers, we just didn't have any, and no time to wait. Naturally, the senior officers we did have were, as a rule, the sons of noblemen or of the bourgeoisie. They had their own ideas, not in tune with Soviet power. So when we invited officers to join us, we simultaneously established a system of control over them. The Commissar's orders were to keep an eye on them, to help them, of course, and to try to learn something from them. In the party, we used to say that the Commissar is the eyes and the ears of the party inside the Red Army.
Right from the start of the Civil War, 1918, they killed all the officers they took prisoner. They shot some of them, took a revolver and just shot them, finished them off.
The whites were equally merciless. These white guards were filmed in charge of Bolshevik prisoners. Seven million people would die in 3 years of civil war. Lenin was the target of an assassin's bullet that summer too, victim of a terrorist campaign. This film is possibly the world's first ever political photo opportunity, organized to prove that Lenin had survived.
Suddenly we heard that Lenin had been shot by a terrorist and that he was badly wounded. They brought him to the Kremlin, where we were on guard at the time. How do you think we all felt? It was our job to guard Lenin, and suddenly he's been seriously wounded.
The would-be assassin was Fania Kaplan, a socialist revolutionary. Her party's campaign resulted in several communist funerals. Death to the bourgeoisie, mourners demanded, and revenge in the form of the Red Terror.
There was no sentimentality about the Red Terror. We were to go as far as shooting our enemies, killing all those who opposed Soviet power. And so we killed them. The whole operation was very well organized by the Extraordinary Commission.
The statue is of Felix Dzerzhinsky, founder of the Extraordinary Commission for Combating Counter-Revolution, Speculation and Sabotage, the Cheka. In their first 4 years, they announced 12,733 executions. These were hungry and desperate years. Men fought for whoever would feed them. Whole units changed sides, from red to white and back again, or even set up on their own. It was a time of chaos and misery.
The roads of Russia were clogged with refugees driven from their homes, families split up, children who'd lost their parents. The job of looking after them fell to the communist women's section.
And all the women from the women's brigade, we had to feed them, wash them, delouse them. Discipline in the party at the time was very strict. It was a revolutionary discipline. We called anybody who grumbled spoilers. The others, people who didn't agree with Soviet power, who couldn't adjust, we snubbed them, shouted at them for not believing. You see, you had to believe in the shining future the Bolsheviks were leading us to.